Well, I have to admit that where I come from in Ireland, we talk about peace a lot. It's a word that's, I would say, embedded in our national psyche. I like to think that's because it's quite recently that we know what the absence of peace feels like, looks like. School I grew up in, we had refugees from our own conflict in Northern Ireland, so it's very alive for Irish people. It's also, of course, for us, not just the absence of conflict. Peace for us has been a peace process, and we still talk about that every single day. I would also say, however, that it's a hard job, peace. You don't win peace, it's not an event. We know in Ireland that W.B. Yeats, decades before we ever had our peace process, spoke about peace dropping slowly. It's complex and it takes time. We fundamentally recognise that we need human rights, equal opportunity or equality of opportunity, democratic freedoms. And what I always think about as what underwrites a peace process, and did in Ireland certainly, the two R's: respect. We know that our two communities on this tiny island of Ireland simply couldn't get to the stage of compromise, negotiation and dialogue without acknowledging the differences between them. And the golden apple then is ideally for a society that it can get to move towards peace built and reconciliation. And that's a big ask. We're still working on that as part of our own peace process in Ireland. That's a big question, because I think they're varied and they're many. In Ireland, one thing that we recognised was that we needed to create a framework for people to be heard. We have had George Mitchell, a wonderful US peacemaker, speak to us a lot recently as we reflected on 20 years of peace in Ireland. And I came to understand, as I listened to him and other people who were involved in building that peace process, that unless people are given that opportunity to be heard, unless people are helped to learn how to compromise, to negotiate, to dialogue, you simply can't make the transition really from conflict to dialogue. The second thing that I am struck by, not just in Irish experience, but if you look across the UN, all of our membership, where we're moving out of conflict towards peace, is that we need to address the underlying causes. An obstacle to peace is probably a failure for us to see the early warning signs, whether it's a denial of human rights, possibly in many cases underdevelopment, and we even saw that in our own case. But I would also argue lack of resources, and there the UN has already begun to look at how we make all of those things move towards either taking them off the table as problems or growing them in terms of capacity, so that they're no longer obstacles to peace. Again, I would argue a very complex process. The first thing, building, and we all look to how we've done things ourselves to look at obstacles to peace. You really need a stable framework of some sort. I think it's an art form, it's not a science, overcoming obstacles to peace. What we did in Ireland was that we had the extraordinary coming together after decades of to and fro, with the Irish and British governments coming together. But around them, we also had a wider framework that supported the parties in conflict in our international partners. The United States, the European Union, best known, but there were many quiet partners behind the scenes who supported that framework for negotiation and helped ultimately to deliver our peace process. So I think the UN itself, honest broker extraordinaire, there's no other institution globally that exists like the UN. And that move that our Secretary General Antonio Guterres has so well explained to us as a sort of continuum where we can garner that international support, the faith, the goodwill that every one of us as a member of the UN brings to the table to move from conflict into a peace building mode. In Ireland, we have experience in mediation, in peacekeeping. We're a small, modest member of the UN. We bring that to the table to reinforce the Secretary General's commitment. For us, that removing the obstacles to peace, building peace, is at the heart of what we believe this organisation is about. It's not the prerogative of 5 member states or of even anyone sitting on the Security Council. It's a shared responsibility, and as a country that's been through conflict, we think we can bring a lot to the table in that context.